When I was a child, my ultimate hero was Superman. I mean, he flew, he shot lasers out of his eyes, he upheld justice, he was strong and fair, he had a cape, he always beat the bad guys. Shame about the kryptonite problem, but what a guy. I mean, what a guy. And this is what Superman said to his adoring fans. This are Superman's inspiring words. There is a superhero in all of us. We just need the courage to put on the cape. And that, brothers and sisters, that is the great inspiration and the great problem. There is a superhero in all of us. The inspiration is that superheroes make us want to be better, to do better, to be the best that we can be. But the problem is that they make us want the cape. To stick a big S for super on our chest and be the best and the brightest, the most applauded, the most lauded, the most adored. We all want to be superheroes. We want to fly. But Jesus calls us to be servants. In our passage this morning, Paul the Apostle writes this in verse 5. Have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. In other words, be like Jesus, who had every right to wear the cape. He's God, but instead he chose to become a servant. And that is what I want to talk about this morning. In our series on spiritual practices, today we are looking at the practice of service. Because we all want to be superheroes, but Jesus calls us to be servants. He calls us to serve. And this has been a cause of disbelief ever since Jesus walked the earth. In Matthew 20, in Mark 10, and in Luke 13, Jesus states the great counter-cultural, upside-down hallmark vision of the kingdom of God, with which the world has grappled with ever since. And it goes like this. The first will be last, and the last will be first. And when his disciples argue about leadership in Matthew 20, this is how Jesus replies. He rebukes them, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Because the Son of Man, that's Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So that is the example that followers of Jesus are called to, service. And the point is not that Jesus did away with authority. He's not a communist. But he completely redefined the rule book on leadership, and he rearranged the lines of authority. He flipped it upside down. The first will be last, and the last will be first. The definition of greatness becomes service. And if we are to follow him, to say that we too are friends and followers of Jesus Christ, he calls us to that example, to live as he did, to live a life of service. So, point number 1, don't be a superhero, be a servant. Don't be a superhero, be a servant. To be a Christian, to be a friend and follower of Jesus Christ means learning to live like Jesus Christ. And I love this passage that Mark just read in Philippians 2. And in this passage, Paul writes to the church in Philippi, and he says, do nothing, verse 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you looking to the interests of others. Do nothing out of selfish ambition, but look to others first. To be selfish is to pursue our own goals at the expense of others. But to have selfless ambition is to pursue others' goals at the expense of ourselves. Jesus calls us to live a life of service to others, and that is deeply countercultural, and it's costly. And it's countercultural because we live in a world that says get ahead, that says be first, not last, be the top dog, aim high, me, me, me. But Jesus says go low, others, others, others. And it's costly because it means laying down your rights and making sacrifices for the sake of others without demanding anything in return, and often being inconvenienced or being made uncomfortable by what you are doing, not getting the glory, not getting the cape, but embracing the mess. Don't be a superhero, be a servant, be like Jesus. And this passage in Philippians contains one of the earliest worship songs of the church, known as the Servant Song, in verses 6 to 11. And it describes Jesus laying aside his majesty to embrace servanthood. And there's two aspects of that servanthood which I think we can draw out from the song. The first is humility. Service is about humility. If we look at verse 6, Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. And it goes on, he humbled himself. Those beautiful words describe Jesus as humble. And service requires humility because it asks you to intentionally make yourself less so that others might have more. Service requires humility because it asks you to do something which you might find demeaning, something beneath you. Whether that is Jesus washing his disciples' feet in John 13, or whether it is Dan and Tim regularly unblocking the loos just behind me. Service requires humility of us because it's unglamorous. And if we're honest, that's not what we naturally want to do. Service requires humility. And secondly, service requires humility because it is often hidden. Service is hidden. Jesus was in very nature God. He is Lord, but he made himself nothing. In the Greek, the word used to describe that literally means that he emptied himself. He poured out his right to godness, if you like, to embrace humanity. He hid his glory to be like us. And servants are not loud and obvious. They are discreet. If you've ever been in a National Trust property, you often find that they have a servant corridor or hidden doors in the rooms so that the domestic servants of the olden days could kind of go in and out without being seen. Service often means being hidden. You're not going to get the glory. You're not going to have that Superman look at me moment. It may be that nobody ever really knows how much it cost you. And if you want a fun Bible exercise, I challenge you after today to go to your Bible and to count the number of one another phrases that you can find in the New Testament. Whether that's love one another, encourage one another, give, pray, exhort, bear one another's burdens, exercise spiritual gifts for the sake of one another. In other words, serve one another. And here's a fun, challenging one for us this morning. Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another. How about that? Being a servant is about embracing humility and hiddenness. It's laying down your rights to serve others. In verse 3, Paul writes, in humility, value others above yourselves. If we are called to love as Jesus did, then we are called to loving service. And to be less abstract for a minute and more real, there's so many different ways that we can do this, that we can serve. Whether that's loving the poor and the needy in our community, practicing hospitality, giving skills, giving time, giving money, giving possessions. Service really is about having an attitude that says, yes, I'm available, I'm listening. It's about seeing others and responding like the Good Samaritan. And ultimately, service is about loving one another. And that does include, and you knew that this was coming, that does include serving on a team at church. And at the back of today's service, Marcus, our vicar at the back, give us a wave. He is going to be standing at the back at the new here. And if you want to know anything about any of the teams at church or any of the community ministries that we do that you want to get involved with, he would love to talk to you. But I want to talk now about the heart attitude behind service. Not being Superman, but being a servant. Because Jesus calls us to be servants, but we still strive to be super. And that's problematic, because my second point of this morning is that to be a servant, you have to lay aside your cape. This is the rub. You have to lay down your cape. True service, which requires humility and is often hidden, means we have to lay down our desire for glory. And that's really hard, because the thing that service does is it reveals our pride, our self-righteousness. To be a Christian means faithfully following Jesus. And it's not that we get to do great works for him, but that he will be free to do his great work through us. And on the surface, those two things can look very similar. You know, you might talk about so-and-so in church. They're amazing. They're so servant-hearted. They're on every team. They're at every event. They are the first to pick up the Hoover. What a hero. What a hero. But what's the motivation behind that, and what is the fruit? True service is humble and it's hidden. It lays down the cape. But self-righteous service is all about you. And that is the easiest trap for us to fall into. Oswald Chambers, one of my favorite Christian writers, said this: "There is no greater threat to our devotion to Christ than our service for Christ." Are we motivated by love for Jesus, or is it all about you? Because the trap that Christians fall into is that we know we're not meant to be Superman. That's not humble. So a lot of the time, the cape that we are tempted by is not the superhero cape, it is the martyr's robe or the crusader's costume. You know, the crusader lives a life of service. They are dedicated and faithful and hardworking, but they are dedicated to their cause more than they are devoted to Jesus. And Jesus calls us to himself first. If our devotion is to a cause, we will become exhausted and depleted and probably resentful. You may end up being holier than thou. I remember once meeting this man who was involved in an overseas mission, and he spent the entire time I was with him ranting about rich churches in the West that don't give away enough money. And you know, maybe everything he said was true, but boy, did he sound bitter and resentful about it. And we've all met people who are a bit of a martyr. And you know it's self-righteous service because they very quickly make you aware of the amount of human effort they put in. But you know, it was nothing, but actually it was a really big deal. And it's the false modesty behind martyrdom that gets really riled when it meets ingratitude or indifference from other people. But true service is free of the need to be recognized and applauded because it has laid down its cape already. Paul, who wrote this letter to the Philippians, did it while he was a prisoner. You can read that in chapter 1. He talks about being in chains for the Lord. Like Jesus, he's gone the whole hog for the sake of others. And eventually, Paul does end up being martyred. But the chief motivation behind Paul's service was love for God. Christ's love compelled him. He was a crusader for Christ, not the cause. And that's so important because people will let us down. Ascension is full of wonderful people who remind me of God every time I meet with them. I am so grateful for all of you. But there are people out there who won't say thank you. And not just your kids who you love anyway, but normal people. To be a servant, you have to lay down your cape. You can't be a martyr and you can't be a crusader. So our motivation has to be devotion to Christ, who calls us to lay down our capes and serve others, loving them out of love for him. Freely you have received, freely give. True service glorifies Christ, bringing life to others as it reveals Christ's love for them. Self-righteous service brings glory to you. Don't be a superhero, be a servant. Lay down your cape. And thirdly and finally, let Jesus be your superhero. To embrace servanthood is to embrace Christ himself. Let Jesus be your superhero. A lot of you who know me will know that I spent 3.5 years living in Hong Kong and then in the Philippines, where I ran a safe house for teenage girls who'd been trafficked or who got mixed up in gangs. And when I was praying to go out there, the church that I worked for asked for a minimum commitment of 1 year with the expectation that you would be there for at least 2 years. And the reason for that was partly to know that you were serious, but mainly because anyone who's done any kind of youth work or missions or working with vulnerable people will know that short-term helpers are really, really unhelpful. Long-term people are like gold. And whenever a new volunteer came to the house, the first question the girls would always ask was, when are you going to leave? Because they were so used to being disappointed. And it's one thing to fly in with your superhero cape to do great works for the Lord, but it's another thing to stick it out for the long haul and continue to love and to serve in the good and in the bad, to allow God to work out his timing, not yours. You know, short-term people were there for their own experience. Long-term people taught the girls that they were worth loving. And those girls were not always easy to love. In my first year in the house, I had a chair thrown at me on 3 separate occasions. I learnt lots of lovely new Chinese swear words, and the real low point was when they gave me nits. And I'm not saying this to sound amazing, because I'm not. I went through my own crusader period, and the Lord humbled me. I'm saying this because when we serve others, when we lay down our rights, when we don't count the cost, when we give up the occasional Sunday morning, we begin to see Jesus at work in new and immeasurable ways, which are beyond what we could imagine. And that was one of the most formative experiences of my life, those 3.5 years. Jesus transforms us, he purifies our hearts, and as we begin to rely on him, when it gets hard, we realize the depths of his love for us, the sheer inexhaustibility of his grace. If you want to mature in your faith, if you want to learn how to become like Jesus, then go low, start serving. And Jesus is at work in those whom we are serving. Culture is changed, lives are transformed, the live stream will run smoothly. Jesus is unveiled by our service. People will recognize his heart as you go low. One of the chair-throwing girls was a worship leader by the time I left Hong Kong. Jesus is also revealed in those we are serving. In Matthew 25:40, Jesus says, "Whatever you did for the least of these, you did it for me." If you connect in some way to serving the vulnerable or the marginalized, you will begin to recognize the face of Christ as you are among them. We start seeing Christ in those whom we serve. and then we love them more. Because when we embrace service, we embrace Christ himself. Whatever you did for the least of these, you did it for me. And as we begin to look and sound and smell like Jesus people, that is the moment when the church comes alive. The more we embrace Christ, the more we will be set on fire with love for him. And if the goal is Jesus, we don't need applause. Our motivation is to hear God's voice saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So let Jesus be your superhero. Embrace Christ as you embrace a life of service. You know, in case you hadn't noticed, we've recently had an election, and I was really amazed by our new Prime Minister. In his first speech, he said this, that public service is a privilege. My government will serve you. Politics can be a force of good. We will show that. And I think what Keir was saying is that he is willing to have the courage to put on the cape. And good for him. My hope and my prayer is that that will be true, that service will be held high. And if this new government does serve us, if it is a force for good, then hallelujah. But it can't save us. Only Jesus can do that. Let Jesus be your superhero. He is the one who came to serve, not to be served. He humbled himself by being obedient to death. He laid aside his cape to embrace the cross. And he doesn't need a government because he is the ultimate government. And he doesn't need to shoot lasers out of his eyes because he's already stronger than death. He has set you free from slavery to sin. He has the power to transform lives. He is truth and he is justice. Jesus Christ, what a guy. What a servant. What a king. Follow him. Amen.